My name is Brenda. I am 68 years old, and my occupation is a retired head nurse. She smiled that sickeningly sweet smile of hers as she handed me the brochures for a rundown facility, eagerly demanding my life savings so she could manage them for me. I played the frail and confused victim perfectly, letting her think she had won right up until the moment my lawyer handed her exactly one shiny, worthless silver penny. It was a crisp Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where the sunlight streams through the windows and makes everything look peaceful. We were sitting around my custom mahogany dining table, the very same table where I had served countless Sunday dinners, poured my sweat and tears into raising my son Jamal, and built a good life from the ground up. Then, my daughter-in-law Chloe slid a glossy pamphlet across the polished wood. The bold letters on the front read, "Whispering Pines." I knew the place well. It was a low-budget, state-run nursing home on the outskirts of Atlanta, the kind of facility where people are dropped off and completely forgotten. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on my table, flashing a condescending smirk that made my stomach turn. She spoke to me slowly, exaggerating every syllable, using that high-pitched voice people use when talking to a toddler. "Brenda, honey." She cooed, her eyes gleaming with unchecked greed. "We are all just so worried about you. Your mind is slipping lately, and it is time Jamal and I took over your finances. Just sign this power of attorney, and we will handle absolutely everything. You will not have to worry about a single thing ever again." I sat there in my own home. The large house I paid off by working grueling 14-hour double shifts at the hospital after my husband passed away. I was widowed at 35, and I managed crisis wards and saved every dime to ensure my son became a successful pediatrician without a single cent of debt. My blood was boiling so hot I thought my chest might catch fire. I looked past Chloe to my son Jamal. He sat there staring at his hands, completely submissive, letting this woman disrespect the mother who gave up her youth for him. He did not say a word to defend me. He just let her talk to me like I was a helpless burden. In that moment, the profound sorrow of losing my son to a woman who saw me purely as a bank account shifted into cold, righteous steel. I did not scream. I did not throw them out. After 40 years of triage nursing, you learn how to keep a flat and impassive face when the trauma hits. I knew exactly what Chloe was up to, and I knew that reacting with anger would only give her the ammunition she needed to prove her point. So I took a trembling breath, let my shoulders slump, and looked down at my lap. I played the frail, confused old woman to absolute perfection. I let her believe she had outsmarted me, that my hard-earned kingdom was about to be hers. She had no idea the kind of storm she was inviting into her life. Let me take you back to how this all began. Because a woman does not build a fortress without first surviving a storm. I was only 35 years old when my husband was suddenly taken from me in a terrible car accident. I was left completely alone with a young boy who looked just like his father, and a mountain of responsibilities resting squarely on my shoulders. I stood at his grave and made a quiet promise to God and to my husband that our boy would never lack for anything, that he would achieve every single dream we had ever talked about. And I kept that promise with my own blood, sweat, and tears. For the next 30 years, I worked grueling 14-hour double shifts as a nurse at the hospital. I can still remember the sharp smell of antiseptic and the deep bone-numbing ache that settled into my body after being on my feet all night. I have thick calluses on my heels to prove it, permanent scars from running up and down hospital corridors, handling medical emergencies, holding the hands of the dying, and then coming home to cook a warm dinner and help my son Jamal with his science projects. I did not take tropical vacations. I did not buy new dresses or treat myself to fancy dinners. Every single extra dollar I earned went straight into his college fund and into my own investments. I made absolutely sure that Jamal graduated from medical school to become a successful pediatrician without a single penny of debt hanging over his head. But I was not just saving for his future. I was quietly building my own empire. While everyone thought I was just a hard-working, humble nurse scraping by to make ends meet, I was spending my lunch breaks reading financial books. I put my money into index funds, letting the compound interest do its quiet magic over decades of discipline. By the time I retired as head nurse, I had amassed a hidden nest egg of over $1.5 million. On top of that, I fully paid off my beautiful 4-bedroom home in a prime Atlanta suburb. I kept my wealth entirely to myself. In our community, you learn early on that showing off what you have only invites greedy hands into your pockets. I wanted Jamal to work hard to be driven by his own ambition, not by the comfort of knowing his mother had a fortune waiting to catch him if he fell. And for a long time, my plan worked perfectly. He was a good, respectful son. He was my absolute pride and joy, the living proof that all my late nights and swollen feet were worth it. I thought we had won. I thought my sacrifices had bought us a lifetime of peace and stability. Then Chloe entered the picture and turned my peaceful reality upside down. Jamal met her at a hospital charity gala, and I knew from the very first moment I laid eyes on her that she was going to be a massive problem. Chloe loudly called herself a lifestyle influencer. In reality, that meant she spent all day taking heavily filtered pictures of her iced lattes, organic salads, and designer handbags for the internet, while bringing in barely enough actual money to cover her weekly manicures. Her taste for luxury was completely insatiable, and it vastly exceeded her non-existent income. She needed to fly first class for weekend trips. She demanded to dine at 5-star restaurants, where they charge $50 for a piece of lettuce, and she desperately needed the world to think she was royalty. My son, God bless his heart, was completely blinded by love. Or perhaps he was just blinded by the expensive illusion she had crafted. To keep up with her outrageous spending habits, Jamal started working longer and longer hours at his pediatric clinic. I would see the heavy, dark circles under his eyes when they came over for Sunday dinner. He looked exhausted, physically drained of the vibrant energy he used to carry. He was working himself into the ground. But whenever Chloe demanded a new luxury SUV or a lavish trip to the islands, Jamal would just swipe his credit card and force a tired smile. He was desperately trying to keep up appearances, terrified of losing the woman he mistakenly thought was his soulmate. I tried to warn him, as any loving mother would. I took him aside one evening on my porch and gently reminded him that a marriage built on a foundation of massive credit card debt and social media validation is bound to crumble. But he dismissed my concerns entirely. He told me I just did not understand modern relationships, that Chloe was building her brand, and that her excessive spending was an investment in their future. I held my tongue. A mother knows when her words are falling on deaf ears and hitting a brick wall. I watched my boy, the brilliant doctor I had sacrificed everything for, slowly turn into an anxious, overworked shell of a man, constantly bending over backward to satisfy a woman whose cup had a hole in the bottom. The dynamics in our family shifted completely. Our quiet, meaningful conversations were replaced by Chloe complaining about the service at a restaurant, or bragging about some new expensive purchase she had made with my son's hard-earned money. I became a background character in my own son's life, a silent spectator to his slow financial and emotional drain. But Chloe's absolute worst offense, the one that shattered the illusion of our family completely, was yet to come. One Friday afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find a strange, aggressively loud sports car parked squarely on my freshly manicured front lawn. I walked to the back of my property, my heart pounding with confusion, and found the door to my guest house wide open. There, sprawled out on my sofa, with his muddy shoes resting right on the cushions, was Chloe's brother Bradley. Bradley was a white American man in his early 30s, with a massive sense of entitlement and absolutely no job to speak of. Without even asking me for permission, without so much as a phone call or a text message, Chloe had moved her brother into my guest house. When I immediately called her to confront her about this blatant invasion of my privacy, she simply sighed with a sickeningly sweet tone and said, Bradley was going through a rough patch. She claimed he needed a quiet place to stay while he worked on securing funding for his tech startup. She acted like she was doing me a massive favor by filling up my empty space with her deadbeat brother. Bradley was an absolute living nightmare. He was a professional freeloader who treated me like I was his personal help. He would boldly walk into my main house and eat the expensive groceries I bought for myself, leave his dirty dishes stacked high in my kitchen sink, and complain loudly if the internet signal in the guest house dipped for even a single second. He walked around my property with a sickening arrogance that made my blood boil, acting as though my home was his own personal luxury resort. I had reached my limit. I called Jamal and demanded that he come over to handle the situation immediately. I expected my son to stand up for me, to kick this leech off my property and demand respect for his mother. Instead, Jamal came over looking like he had not slept in a week. He sat at my kitchen table, buried his face in his trembling hands, and literally begged me to just keep the peace. He said he was too exhausted from the clinic to fight with Chloe, and that if he kicked Bradley out, Chloe would make his home life a living hell. He pleaded with me, with tears in his eyes, to just let it slide for a few months until Bradley got on his feet. That was the exact moment my heart truly broke into a million unfixable pieces. I looked at my son, the boy I had scrubbed hospital floors to raise, and I realized he was completely whipped. He was too cowardly and too broken down to protect his own mother in her own home. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I had lost my son. I had lost him to a manipulative woman who saw me not as a mother, not as a human being worthy of respect, but merely as an ATM and a convenient piece of real estate. Chloe did not love Jamal, and she certainly had no respect for me or the life I had built. They were just waiting for me to fade away so they could swoop in and take everything. But they severely underestimated the quiet, calculated strength of a mother who knows her own worth. The disrespect did not start with a shout. It crept into my home like a slow-moving poison, disguised as casual remarks and careless actions. Chloe began treating me as if I were a squatter in my own house. I would walk into my kitchen, the heart of my home, and find her casually trying to erase my existence. One Tuesday morning, I caught her tossing my seasoned cast-iron skillets right into the garbage bin. Those skillets had belonged to my grandmother, passed down through generations, holding the flavor of countless Sunday dinners and family gatherings. When I pulled them out of the trash, Chloe just rolled her eyes and sighed, saying my kitchen needed to look more modern and that those heavy, rusted pans were an embarrassing eyesore. She would look me up and down with absolute disdain, scoffing at my comfortable slacks and cardigans. She actually had the nerve to tell me that my wardrobe was embarrassing Jamal, suggesting I should dress more appropriately for a woman who was supposed to be fading into the background. Then there was Bradley. That boy treated my home like an all-inclusive luxury resort where the rules simply did not apply to him. I would spend hours at the grocery store, carefully selecting the fresh produce and premium cuts of meat I enjoyed, only to wake up the next morning and find my refrigerator completely ransacked. Bradley would devour my groceries, leaving his sticky plates and empty juice cartons piled high on my expensive granite countertops. But the absolute final straw with his daily disrespect was his car. He drove a flashy leased sports car that he could not even afford, and instead of using the wide circular driveway, he started parking it right on top of my manicured front lawn. He left deep, muddy tire tracks across the green grass I had spent years cultivating into a pristine landscape. When I calmly asked him to move his vehicle off my lawn, he simply laughed in my face, waved his hand dismissively, and walked back into my guest house without a single word of apology. They were parading around my property as if I were already dead and buried. They spoke over me, made decisions about my home, and completely erased my presence. They thought my silence meant I was weak, that my age meant I was losing my grip on reality. But they clearly did not know who they were dealing with. I spent 40 years as a triage nurse. I know how to stay perfectly calm while assessing a critical situation. I know how to watch a disease spread and calculate the exact moment to intervene. I bit my tongue and swallowed my immediate anger, choosing instead to observe their every move with clinical precision. I watched them laugh. I watched them take, and I watched them build their little arrogant kingdom on my foundation. I was gathering my strength, waiting for the perfect moment to show them exactly who owned the ground they were walking on. It was a Tuesday evening, a quiet, muggy Georgia night, the kind of quiet that usually brings me a deep sense of peace. Tariq, my sweet and brilliant 8-year-old grandson, had left his tablet down on the living room sofa. He was upstairs supposed to be brushing his teeth and getting ready for bed, so I walked down the dimly lit hallway to fetch it for him. The house was entirely still, except for the faint sound of voices drifting in from the back patio. I stepped into the living room, reaching down to pick up the glowing screen from the cushions, when the sharp, undeniable sound of Chloe's voice caught my ear. The heavy glass door to the patio had been cracked open just an inch or two to let the evening breeze circulate. I heard Bradley laughing. It was that arrogant, grating, entitled laugh of his that always made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stopped dead, right where I stood. Now I did not walk down those stairs intending to eavesdrop on anyone. But when you hear your own name tossed around in the dark by vultures, you freeze. You hold your breath, and you listen to every single word. Chloe was speaking frantically, her voice completely stripped of that sugary, fake sweet coating she always used when she spoke to me. She was pacing the patio, her heels clicking against the stone, telling Bradley that she was drowning. She confessed she was hiding over $80,000 of secret credit card debt. She had been intercepting the mail, hiding the massive statements from Jamal, recklessly financing her fake, luxurious internet life with plastic she could never dream of paying off. Bradley simply scoffed, indifferent to her panic, and boldly stated that he needed at least $50,000 in seed capital for some ridiculous tech startup he was supposedly launching. We all knew Bradley did not know the first thing about technology, let alone hard work. But his entitlement knew absolutely no bounds. Then the warm air in my own living room turned to pure ice. Chloe lowered her voice, but the night was so quiet that I heard every single syllable with crystal clarity. She told him to calm down, that they had absolutely nothing to worry about. She said the solution to all their financial problems was sleeping right upstairs. Then she said the words that will be burned into my memory for the rest of my natural life. She said once we get the old bat declared incompetent, I will have Jamal liquidate her retirement accounts. We will dump her in that cheap home upstate, and the house is ours. I stood there in the shadows, clutching my grandson's tablet so tightly that my knuckles achingly popped. The old bat. That is what 30 years of 14-hour nursing shifts had reduced me to. That is what rubbing my swollen feet every night, skipping meals to pay off a mortgage, and building a debt-free life for my son had amounted to. An old bat, a convenient, disposable payday for a woman who could not afford the designer shoes on her feet and her lazy, scheming brother. I felt a sharp physical pain tear right through the center of my chest. It was a suffocating, blinding ache that made me want to fall to my knees and gasp for air. But I did not make a sound. I did not move a single muscle. I stood in the dark and let the reality of their wicked greed wash over me. I backed away from the patio door, stepping softly on the hardwood floors I had swept and polished with my own hands for decades. I needed a moment to breathe, so I slipped into Jamal's home office. My heart was pounding frantically against my ribs. I was praying to a God above that my son had absolutely no idea about this wicked plan. I prayed with every fibre of my being that Jamal was just a foolish, overworked man, blinded by a pretty face, completely ignorant to the demons plotting in his own backyard. But the Lord works in mysterious ways, pulling back the curtain to reveal exactly what we need to see, even when it shatters our entire world. Lying right there on Jamal's mahogany desk, illuminated by the soft glow of his desk lamp, was a printed email chain between him and Chloe. She had apparently printed it out to use as leverage against him. I picked up the paper, my hands shaking so violently the paper rustled in the quiet room. Chloe had been harping on him for weeks about my memory planting fake seeds of doubt, detailing fabricated stories about me leaving the stove on, or forgetting where I placed my keys. And then I read his reply. I read the words typed by the boy I had given my life for. Jamal wrote that he was absolutely exhausted from her constantly complaining about me, that he could not take the nagging anymore. He wrote that fine, he would agree to bring a doctor to the house to evaluate Mum's mental state, just to get some peace and quiet in his own marriage. I traced the black ink on that white page, reading the words over and over until they blurred together. My own flesh and blood. The boy I had carried, nurtured, protected, and sacrificed my entire youth for was willing to hand over my sanity and my freedom just to shut his greedy wife up. He was willing to let them paint me as a senile burden, because he was too much of a coward to stand up for his own mother. The hot tears that had gathered in my eyes instantly dried up. The profound, suffocating sorrow I felt only moments ago evaporated into the cool night air. In its place rose something entirely different. It was an emotion so cold, so intensely focused, that it frightened me for a fraction of a second. It was righteous steel. I realized right then and there in the dim light of my son's office that I was no longer dealing with family. I was dealing with parasites who were actively trying to consume my life. And a seasoned triage nurse knows exactly how to amputate a deadly infection before it kills the host. I needed to be absolutely certain before I made my next move, so I kept my mouth shut and watched. But they did not just wait for me to slip up. They decided to give nature a push. It started with small, aggravating things designed to make me question my own sanity. My car keys, which I have placed in the exact same ceramic bowl by the front door for over 20 years, suddenly went missing. I would spend hours looking for them, tracing my steps, feeling a genuine knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. Then Chloe would magically find them buried under a pile of mail in the guest bathroom, a room I never even used. She would hand them to me with a look of deep pity, tilting her head and saying, "Brenda, sweetie, you really need to be more careful. Your memory is just getting worse every single day." I took the keys, forced a shaky smile, and thanked her, while my blood ran absolutely cold. I knew she was planting the seeds of my supposed dementia. Then they escalated their wicked game to something incredibly dangerous. One Thursday morning, I came down the stairs to find the distinct, suffocating smell of natural gas filling my kitchen. The front burner of my stove was turned on full blast without a flame. Panic seized my chest for a fraction of a second before my triage nurse instincts kicked in. I quickly opened all the windows, turned off the knob, and stepped out onto the back porch to clear my lungs. 10 minutes later, Bradley strolled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes like he had just woken up. He sniffed the air, feigned absolute horror, and immediately called Jamal at the clinic. I stood by the counter and listened to this unemployed freeloader tell my son that I was a hazard to myself and everyone around me. He told Jamal I had left the gas running all night and almost blew the entire house to pieces. Jamal rushed home, his face pale with fear, and begged me to let Chloe take over my daily routine. He looked at me as if I were a fragile piece of glass about to shatter. I looked right back at him, nodding slowly, accepting his concern, with the meekness of a defeated old woman. But inside, my mind was racing with a fierce clarity. I had been awake since 4 in the morning reading in my bedroom. I knew exactly who had crept into the kitchen and turned that knob. They were trying to build a documented history of my incompetence, and Jamal was playing right into their hands, the final straw. The moment that pushed me past the point of sorrow and straight into the realm of pure calculated retaliation happened exactly 3 days later. Chloe waltzed into my living room with a tall, slick-looking white American man wearing a cheap suit and carrying a battered leather briefcase. She introduced him as Dr. Harrison, claiming he was a close friend of Bradley, who was just stopping by to do a friendly wellness check on me. I recognized the type immediately. After 40 years in the medical field, you learn how to spot a fraud from a mile away. He did not ask me standard medical questions. He did not check my vitals, or ask about my daily habits or my medical history. Instead, he asked me if I knew what year it was, if I knew the exact value of my home, and if I felt overwhelmed by my financial responsibilities. It was a completely orchestrated interrogation designed to make me sound confused and incompetent. I played along perfectly, giving him hesitant answers and looking nervously at Chloe for validation. When he finished his little performance, Dr. Harrison packed up his briefcase, looked at Chloe, and solemnly declared that I was showing severe signs of cognitive decline. Chloe did not even try to hide the triumphant gleam in her eyes. As soon as the supposed doctor walked out the front door, the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law act completely dropped. She sat across from me, pulled a thick stack of legal documents from her designer tote bag, and slammed them onto my coffee table. The mask was entirely gone. She looked at me with cold, ruthless calculation. "Brenda," she said, her voice dropping all pretense of affection. "We are done playing games. You are a danger to yourself and a massive burden on my husband. These papers give Jamal full control of your estate, your bank accounts, and this house. You are going to sign them right now. If you refuse, Bradley and I are calling Adult Protective Services this afternoon. We have a doctor willing to testify that you belong in a locked ward, and they will drag you out of here in a wheelchair." I looked down at the thick stack of papers resting on my beautiful mahogany table. They were transfer deeds, financial powers of attorney, and medical consent forms. Every single page was designed to strip away my autonomy, my dignity, and the wealth I had literally broken my back to build from the ground up. Chloe sat back and crossed her legs, tapping her manicured nails against the arm of the chair. She was so incredibly sure of herself. She genuinely believed that she had backed an old, helpless black woman into an inescapable corner. She thought the threat of state intervention would terrify me into giving up everything I owned to save myself the embarrassment. I thought about the thousands of hours I spent saving lives in the emergency room. The double shifts, the holidays I missed, just to make sure Jamal never had to struggle a single day in his life. And here was this entitled woman demanding the keys to my hard-earned kingdom with a smug smile on her face. I felt a slow, icy calm wash over my entire body. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked at those papers. Let my hands tremble just enough to sell the performance, and whispered that I needed a few days to process everything. Chloe smirked, gathered her things, and told me I had exactly until the end of the week. She thought she had won the war, but she had no idea she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy her. I did not shed a single tear that night. When you have spent 4 decades in a hospital emergency room, watching life slip away and monitoring fading pulses, you learn very quickly that panicking is a luxury you simply cannot afford. Crying clouds your vision, and anger makes you sloppy. I needed to be sharper than I had ever been in my entire life. So I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat at the kitchen table, and began to execute a protocol. I was no longer a grieving mother dealing with a wayward son. I was a seasoned triage nurse stabilizing a critical patient, and that patient was my own future. Early the next morning, I picked up the phone and made a call to an old contact who gave me the direct number for Attorney Davis. Attorney Davis was a formidable, no-nonsense black woman in her early 50s who had built a fierce reputation in Atlanta as a ruthless estate and family lawyer. When I walked into her downtown office and laid out every single detail of Chloe's sinister plot, including the audio recordings and the fake doctor visit, Attorney Davis did not gasp or offer me empty pity. She simply leaned back in her leather chair, steepled her fingers, and gave me a look of cold, calculating understanding. She told me we needed to build a fortress around my assets so high and so thick that Chloe and Jamal would break their teeth trying to bite into it. Our very first step was to absolutely bulletproof my mental competency. I did not just go to one doctor. Attorney Davis scheduled independent, rigorous psychiatric and cognitive evaluations with 3 of the top neurologists and geriatric psychiatrists in the state of Georgia. I sat through hours of exhaustive tests. They tested my memory, my spatial reasoning, my problem-solving skills, and my emotional stability. I completed complex puzzles, answered rapid-fire questions, and navigated intricate psychological assessments with the absolute precision of a woman who had managed crisis wards for half her life. When the final reports came back, the results were undeniable. The leading specialist looked at me with deep respect and certified that my cognitive health was not just fine, but functioning in the top 1% for my age group. I had the mental acuity of a woman 20 years younger. I was legally and medically untouchable. With my sanity certified by unimpeachable experts, Attorney Davis and I moved to the financial battlefield. We quietly and systematically began to drain the blood from the kingdom Chloe thought she was about to inherit. I transferred every single asset I owned into a highly restricted blind trust. My $1.5 million in index funds, the diverse stock portfolios I had built over 30 years, and all of my liquid cash were completely locked away. Then we moved the deed to my beautiful, fully paid-off 4-bedroom home into a newly formed limited liability company. I no longer owned anything in my personal name. To the outside world, and more importantly to any greedy relative searching public records, Brenda was suddenly a woman with nothing to her name. But I was not going to leave my innocent grandson to the wolves. Tariq was the only pure thing left in that house, and I knew his parents' financial recklessness would eventually ruin his future. So I made him the sole beneficiary of an ironclad educational and living trust. The trust was structured so meticulously that neither Chloe nor Jamal could ever access a single dime. The funds would go directly to his future tuition, his housing, and his needs managed entirely by an independent corporate trustee. Chloe and Jamal would never be able to touch it, leverage it, or borrow against it. Every time I signed my name to a transfer document, I felt a strange mixture of profound grief and immense liberation. I was officially severing the financial umbilical cord I had kept attached to Jamal for 35 years. I had spent my entire adult life trying to pave a golden road for him, hoping he would walk it with honor. Instead, he let a greedy woman turn it into a toll booth. Attorney Davis assured me that the corporate trustee managing Tariq's fund was notoriously strict. If Chloe tried to submit a fake invoice for school supplies to get cash, it would be instantly rejected. It brought me an incredible sense of peace, knowing that all those grueling 14-hour shifts, all those nights with aching feet would actually benefit the innocent child who still loved me, rather than funding Bradley's fake tech startup or Chloe's designer handbag collection. My armor was forged. My kingdom was secured. And now it was time to let my enemies walk right into the trap. I returned to my house and slipped right back into the character of the frail, defeated old woman they desperately needed me to be. I let my shoulders slump. I walked with a slight shuffle, and I kept my gaze nervously fixed on the floor whenever Chloe entered the room. I allowed her to believe that her wicked intimidation tactics had completely broken my spirit. She strutted around my house with the sickening confidence of a conqueror who had just claimed a new territory. Bradley was even worse, leaving his dirty dishes everywhere and loudly talking on the phone about the massive investments he was supposedly about to secure for his fake tech startup, acting as though he was already spending my money. The trap was fully set the following Tuesday afternoon. Chloe marched into my living room with a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. She stood over me while I sat in my favorite armchair, looking down her nose with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She thrust a pen into my hand and slammed the paperwork down on the coffee table. She told me it was a comprehensive will and asset management document that would legally sign over the entire estate to Jamal, giving them full power of attorney and complete control over my finances. She reminded me of her cruel ultimatum, stating that if I did not sign it right then and there, she would call Adult Protective Services and have me dragged away to a state-run psychiatric ward. I looked up at her, letting my hands tremble violently. I forced my eyes to fill with tears, playing the part of a terrified, helpless mother cornered by a ruthless predator. I whispered a shaky apology, begging her to just make sure I was taken care of. Chloe simply smirked a cold, soulless expression and told me to just sign the dotted line. With a shaking hand, I slowly signed my name exactly where she pointed. She eagerly snatched the papers back, her eyes gleaming with unchecked greed, absolutely thrilled by her victory. However, Chloe was far too arrogant and far too ignorant to realize the massive flaw in her grand plan. She had no idea that the document she was holding was a completely legally useless piece of paper. It was drafted purely to trap her. Because I had already transferred every single asset into the blind trust days prior, I legally owned absolutely nothing for that piece of paper to control. She was essentially demanding the keys to a house that had already been demolished. But I let her relish in her fake victory. I let her think she had won the war because I needed her pride to be at an absolute all-time high for the spectacular fall that was about to come. She tucked the folder safely into her designer bag and immediately pulled out her phone to text Jamal the good news. I watched her walk away, my trembling hands instantly becoming steady. The bait had been taken. The hook was firmly set and the illusion was perfectly maintained. Now, all that was left was to reel them in. 2 days later, I told Jamal and Chloe that my lawyer needed to briefly review the documents to finalize the transfer of the estate. I requested a formal family meeting at Attorney Davis's high-rise office downtown. They agreed immediately, eager to rush the process and get their hands on the money. When we arrived at the sleek, towering glass building, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. We were escorted into a massive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire Atlanta skyline. Chloe walked in like she owned the entire building, wearing a brand-new, expensive dress she undoubtedly bought on credit to celebrate her upcoming payday. Jamal looked nervous, but relieved, thinking the conflict was finally over. And Bradley, who had brazenly invited himself to collect his supposed tech startup funding, sat back in a leather chair with an excessively smug grin plastered across his face. Attorney Davis entered the room, projecting an aura of absolute authority. She did not offer them warm greetings or small talk. She sat at the head of the long glass table, opened a sleek black folder, and looked directly at Chloe. She announced in a crisp, uncompromising voice that we were gathered to formally conclude my financial and living arrangements. Chloe leaned forward, practically vibrating with excitement, ready to be handed the keys to the kingdom. Instead, Attorney Davis calmly revealed that I would not be moving into that cheap state-run facility upstate. She informed them that I was permanently relocating to a luxury retirement villa on the coast, an exclusive high-end community where I would be spending my days enjoying the ocean breeze, surrounded by top-tier amenities. The cost was exorbitant, and it was entirely funded by my own wealth. Chloe's smug smile instantly vanished. She looked at Jamal, confused and starting to panic. But Attorney Davis was not finished. With lethal precision, she slid a thick white envelope across the polished glass table toward Chloe and Jamal. Jamal opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal eviction notice for Bradley, demanding he vacate the guest house within 48 hours or face immediate arrest for trespassing. Behind that was a notification proving that the house had already been legally sold to an LLC, meaning they had zero claim to the property. Finally, there was a copy of my newly drafted will, explicitly stating that my entire fortune had been irrevocably transferred into an educational trust for Tariq, completely untouchable by either of them. Jamal stared at the papers, his face draining of all color, as the reality of his massive failure washed over him. Bradley jumped out of his chair, shouting that this was illegal, but Attorney Davis silenced him with a single terrifying glare. Chloe was hyperventilating, stammering that she had the signed asset management document, that she had proof I gave everything to them. Attorney Davis simply smiled a cold, predatory smile and informed her that the document controlled an estate with a net worth of exactly $0. The room was suffocatingly quiet. The total devastation on their faces was a masterpiece 40 years in the making. Then Attorney Davis reached into her pocket and placed a small, elegant velvet box on the table. She slid it gently toward Chloe. Chloe, shaking with rage and confusion, slowly opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of dark satin, was a single tarnished silver penny. I stood up from my chair, feeling the strength of 1,000 ancestors lifting my spine. I looked down at the woman who had tried to erase my existence, and at the son who had stood by and let it happen. I leaned in close, resting my hands on the glass table, my voice dripping with lethal grace. You wanted my wealth, Chloe. You wanted the kingdom I broke my back to build. But a penny for your thoughts is all your loyalty is worth. I turned my back on their stunned, silent faces and walked out of that glass office with my head held high. I left them sitting there with nothing but a worthless piece of paper, a looming eviction, and a mountain of secret debt they would now have to face completely alone. The storm they invited into my home had finally broken, but it was their world that was washed away. The aftermath of that meeting in the lawyer's office was swifter and far more brutal than even I had anticipated. Without my fully paid-off house to leverage as collateral, Chloe and Bradley found themselves standing on a massive financial landmine that detonated almost immediately and spectacularly. Chloe's carefully constructed world of designer bags, expensive dinners, and luxurious internet posts crumbled to absolute dust within a matter of days. The creditors came knocking with a vengeance, freezing her secret accounts and demanding payments she simply could not make. Her fake online persona was completely shattered. Bradley did not even make it to the 48-hour deadline Attorney Davis had given him. He foolishly tried to lock himself inside my guest house and loudly refused to leave, claiming he had tenant rights. So I did exactly what any sensible property owner would do. I called the local sheriff. I sat on my front porch with a fresh cup of hot coffee and watched with profound satisfaction as 2 uniformed deputies physically escorted a screaming, completely humiliated Bradley off my manicured lawn. But the eviction was just the absolute beginning of his legal nightmares. Attorney Davis made good on her promise and handed over the audio recordings of their wicked plot to the authorities. Bradley and his fake doctor friend suddenly found themselves facing very real, very serious fraud charges for attempting to fabricate medical competency evaluations. Meanwhile, the sheer magnitude of Chloe's secret credit card debt finally came to light, and the awful truth hit Jamal like a runaway freight train. My son finally woke up from his expensive, disastrous delusion. He saw the monster he had married for exactly what she was. She was a ruthless, calculated parasite who had not only drained all his bank accounts, but had actively tried to destroy his own mother just to fund her fake lifestyle. The blinders were completely ripped off his eyes. Jamal filed for divorce the very next morning, freezing their joint assets and finally taking control of his own life. A few days later, he came to my front door. The confident, successful pediatrician I had raised was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, exhausted man with dark bags under his eyes and shoulders hunched with absolute shame. He fell to his knees right there on my welcome mat, sobbing uncontrollably. He begged for my forgiveness, pleading with me to let him come back home to let us be a family again. He apologized over and over, saying he had been entirely foolish, that he had been manipulated, and that he never truly understood how evil Chloe was until it was too late. He grabbed my hands and wept bitterly, asking his mother to save him from the terrible wreckage of his own making. I watched my son cry, feeling a deep maternal ache in my chest, but the days of me sacrificing my peace to fix his mistakes were permanently over. I looked down at my weeping son, and my heart genuinely ached for him. Because a mother never truly stops loving her child, no matter how old they happen to get. But I did not reach down to pull him up, and I did not offer him the easy comfort he was desperately seeking. I looked him right in the eyes and spoke with a calm, unwavering clarity. I told Jamal that I loved him with every fiber of my being, but love does not equal blind compliance. I explained that for 35 years I had shielded him from the harsh realities of the world, making sure he never faced a single struggle, and that protection had unfortunately turned him into a man willing to sacrifice his own mother to appease a greedy woman. I held my boundaries absolutely firm. I told him he could not just move back into my house and pretend none of this terrible ordeal had happened. He needed to stand on his own 2 feet, rebuild his own life from scratch, manage his own massive debts, and figure out how to be a strong, independent father for little Tariq. I told him that a tearful apology is just words on the wind, and if he ever wanted a prominent place in my life again, he would have to earn it, Chad, through consistent, respectful actions over time. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do as a parent, but it was the only way to truly save him from himself. A month later, I officially closed the door on that massive house in the Atlanta suburbs. I packed up my cherished memories, left the bad energy behind, and moved into a gorgeous sun-drenched condominium overlooking the bright blue ocean on the coast. The warm sea breeze comes through my open windows every morning, bringing a profound sense of peace I have not felt since my husband was alive. I am now surrounded by a vibrant, active community of like-minded, strong women who share my values and respect my journey. We take morning walks on the sandy beach, we drink wine on our terraces at sunset, and we celebrate the freedom of our golden years without anyone ever treating us like disposable burdens. Best of all, I get to see my sweet grandson Tariq every single weekend. He runs happily along the sandy shores, collecting seashells and building sandcastles entirely free from the toxic environment of his parents' failed marriage. When I look at his bright smile, I feel a deep, immense satisfaction knowing with absolute certainty that his future is completely protected by the trust I carefully established. He will go to college, and he will have a solid foundation, free from the greedy hands that tried to steal it. I survived the ultimate family betrayal and emerged stronger than ever before, proving that my legacy is fiercely guarded. My mind is always razor-sharp, and my peace is finally, truly, and entirely my own. Listen to me, my beautiful sisters. Never mistake a mother's unconditional love for weakness. We break our backs to build a kingdom for our children, but we are not required to hand the keys over to the vultures they bring home. Protect your peace, protect your mind, and protect your purse. It took me nearly losing everything I had built over 40 years of grueling nursing shifts to finally understand that profound truth. We spend our entire lives pouring our blood, our sweat, and our tears into our children. We want them to have the world, to walk on paths paved with gold, and to never experience the hardships we had to endure. But sometimes, in our desperate desire to shield them from the storm, we forget to teach them how to recognize a snake when it slithers right through their front door. Jamal had to learn the absolute hardest way possible that true love is not measured by the price tag on a designer handbag or the zip code of a luxury apartment. True love is built on respect, loyalty, and honoring the foundation your family laid down for you. I am actual living proof that you can survive the deepest heartbreak and come out stronger on the other side. My days are now filled with the soothing sound of the ocean waves, the laughter of my sweet grandson Tariq, and the joyful company of women who know their worth and refuse to settle for anything less. I do not harbor bitterness in my heart, because holding on to anger is just like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Instead, I hold on to the absolute certainty that I protected my legacy and secured my peace. My story is truly not just a simple tale of betrayal. It is a very powerful testament to the unbreakable strength of a mother who simply refused to ever be erased. Now I want to turn this conversation over to all of you wonderful listeners who have stayed with me through this emotional journey. Would you have kept your composure like a triage nurse, or would you have thrown her out the very first day? Sharing our stories makes us stronger, and reading your thoughts brings so much joy to my heart. Let us build a community of strong, wise women who uplift and protect one another against the storms of life. Thank you for listening to my truth and for standing by my side today. Always remember your worth, and never let anyone make you feel like a burden in the kingdom you built with your own 2 hands. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to hear from you in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? What time is it there right now? And how would you have handled a daughter-in-law like Chloe Stand? Tall, stay blessed, and I will see you in the next video.